Hello, and welcome to this new session entitled Kubernetes on GCP, the GKE way. So the GKE way is basically Kubernetes on GCP Cloud using the inbuilt services by GCP and Google. So it basically, if you go to the documentation here, which I've put into the notes, it basically describes it as the most scalable and fully automated Kubernetes service. So having a service like that allows us to stand up a Kubernetes cluster really quickly definitely helps us in our study preparation, and because it helps us that we can verify various aspects for our own study purposes. So what I've done here is, if you go to the channel here and you go to the GitHub repository here and you go to series 1 introduction here and you go to 1.7 here, I basically sort of said the Kubernetes engine here, the documentation is here, and what I've said is there's certain notes that will be used, and you'll basically have to create a project for this, authenticate into the project. But once you actually do that, um, and you set your region and your zone, it's really quickly to actually set up a Kubernetes cluster here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dashboard here. Now I've previously run these commands here just so I'm not having to wait from them in the actual video itself, but they were really quick. You may have to just wait a few moments for everything to initialize, but once initialized, you actually won't have to do it again. So if you basically go to run my commands here, so enable the required APIs. If I go into my dashboard here and I just sort of see if they're still all enabled, and you can see, nothing's come back here, so they're basically all enabled, but it only take a few moments for you to actually enable those. Um, and if I try and run this command, it says gcloud container clusters list here, and I'm just going to put this here so it's out of the way a little bit. So if I look now, I don't have any actual clusters here. So I have no clusters available. And what I've done is I've put in the actual notes in here of how to actually create a test cluster for my testing. So what I can do is, I can sort of say, give me a generic type cluster, and I'm going to allow GCP to decide what should be included, or I could start to actually define what I really want to actually have in my cluster. So just for this test cluster, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take the command and I'm going to go back to my dashboard, and I'm going to allow that um, to run. And you can see that, it starts to create your cluster. Now I'm specifically in Europe, so that's why I've decided that my zone should be Europe. But basically, you'll see that it's starting to pull up my cluster, and what will happen is it will give me the defaults of everything that I require. Now, this would take some modification if you were to stand this up for a production environment. But right now, all I simply want to do is, if I kind of go back to my notes here and I go back to, let's say, series 2 here, and this is where we're working on the CKA exam itself. But if I go into my CKA exam study materials here, you can see that I'm going to use this specific GKE cluster for network policies, green blue deployments, canary deployments. So I'm kind of working through those type of scenarios, and I could use my master from my Raspberry. And you know that if you've been following along the series, I also have a master 2, which I'm using for like ECC backup and restore type questions. But in this case, I want to just get a little bit of practice of actually standing up this cluster into Google Cloud using the Kubernetes engine, because it kind of gives me all of the inbuilt capabilities, especially regarding network policy, canary deployment strategies. I don't want to be worrying about, you know, if I'm studying a specific question that's related to networking policies, for example, you know, is the networking on my master Raspberry Pi correct? So I want to limit that stress and strain away from my own studies. So I'm basically, in this case, I'm just using the Kubernetes engine to say, give me cluster, provide me with the actual defaults, um, so that I can actually use it for my own study. So if we can go back into this document here, you can see that I've just run default setup, and then when that's ready, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my describe cluster. So I'm going to see what's available in my cluster. So as you can see here, it's still setting up my cluster. Now, it's probably been, since I started the recording, it's probably been about 5 minutes in total since I've actually, you know, started creating this cluster. And you can see that the cluster right now is being health checked. So I'm not far off it, but I am going to pause this video, and when the cluster is ready, I will return. Okay, so you can see that my cluster is now ready. Now, it took about 8 to 9 minutes in total, but it's still an awful lot quicker than me having to go in and set up, from manual scratch, a cluster myself. But you can see here the cluster name, the location, the master version, the IP, the machine type that it gave me is running, and all of this was provided to me, with just one command. I only literally said, create me this cluster, you know, um, and I didn't define too much about the actual cluster because I just want to have some cluster, you know, that basically says to me, I know that the networking is correct for my studying, so I don't have to worry too much about the actual networking side. Now I can go in here as I was saying, and I can actually describe my cluster, and you can get all pieces of information about your actual cluster itself. So you can go in and you can describe here, and you can see an awful lot more about your actual cluster here. And I would, take the time to go through this cluster setup and just see for your own learning, about what's actually being built. It definitely describes an awful lot of networking here, and it's great learning to understand what is actually being built. But for right now, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure and see if my pods are actually running now. So as we know, from the various other ways that we stood up a Kubernetes cluster, I should have pods, and you can see that very, very quickly, within a matter of 2 to 3 minutes, I basically had all of these pods up and running. And some are for metrics, some are for DNS, some are for proxy, some are for Fluent Bid, you know, and there's all of these pods and they're already in a running state. So the cluster is already, very, very in a healthy state. But what I'd like to do now is I'd actually like to go down and just make sure that I actually have some nodes here. So I can go basically sort of say, get my nodes here, and you can see that already I actually have 3 nodes here because that's the actual default amount of nodes, and I can see that the version is this. Now, again, if you're studying for an exam, this just takes a lot of stress and strain away because you know that this cluster is golden, and everything's going to work. Huge benefit when you're actually studying for an exam. So you can see here, I just put down to sort of say, to list your nodes, and your Kubernetes clusters should be now running. Now, one thing we sort of saw before with the Raspberry Pi version was that we basically, when we stood up the cluster ourselves, we had a running taint that we had to remove before we could actually remove or run with the actual cluster. But in this case with GCP, the Kubernetes engine, we did not have that same limitation. Okay. So what we've done is we've verified that our cluster is up and running. And what we want to do now is actually create a deployment to make sure that it is indeed all working together. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my notes here, and I'm going to go to the section 3 called validations. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new deployment and a service. And I'm going to just literally copy this YAML code here from my notes here. I'm just going to make sure that it's actually indented all correctly. I'm going to save that file. And as the notes say here, all I actually have to do is just apply that file. And what that will do is that will actually create me a deployment and a service. Now, it will take a few moments for the actual service to come available, but while that's happening, I'll see, get pods that show wide, just to make sure that I can sort of see IPs, I can see nodes, so I can see the nodes that they're actually deployed on. So, when you've run your deployment here, you can sort of see that, well, two of the actual pods here went onto this node, one of the pods here went onto this node, and one of the actual pods went onto this node. So it's quite evenly distributed across all of the nodes for this deployment itself. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get the information about the service here, because as we know, we'll have a service in front of this deployment. And you can see that right now I've already got an external IP, which basically means that, the Nginx service, it's a load type balancer. It has a cluster IP and it has an external IP and it has a port. So that basically I can now access this deployment up on my Kubernetes cluster here on GCP. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just do a simple curl. So I'm going to sort of say curl to this IP here. And as you can see here, I'm getting welcome to Nginx here. So that's really, really positive, because it basically means that my service is up and running, my pods are up and running, my nodes are up and running, everything's up and running on the Kubernetes engine on GCP, and it's looking really healthy. And this way, I can have security that when I'm going to start testing or trying out different solutions, you know, regarding networking or deployment strategies, that I have something that does work from the beginning. So that's really positive. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.